Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we are meeting again for this series focused on administrators as we are continue to move through the California Practitioner's Guide of supporting students with English that have supporting English learners with disabilities. This project is brought to you in conjunction with Imperial County SELPA, CDE, and CCEE, California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. So thank you for returning. Let's see. Sorry, moving through the slides. In order to access the resources for today, please feel free to click on or scan the QR code. This will take you to our Padlet, where you can find the presentation slides. And again, our Padlet is there for you, and all of the resources are there for you to share and remake with your respective districts. Again, the Padlet can be utilized by moving horizontally and vertically. And again, all of the presentations from our slides from our previous presentations are there, housed there. And also each column focuses on the resources provided for each chapter of the Practitioner's Guide. In order to get started, let's please again feel free to drop into the chat your name. We'd love to hear from who's joining us across the state. Share with us your district, your county office of ed that you may be associated with, or your SELPA, and share your position and role so we can continue to get to know you. I'll give you a few seconds to do so. Thank you again for joining us in the middle of the day. It's a quick hour. We have a lot to cover, but hopefully you've continued to find this information and these resources to be valuable in your work. Our team, again, real quick, is we are a small but mighty team. We come to you from Imperial County. Today, myself, I'll be presenting. I'm Christina Zavala. I'm a SELPA coordinator here at Imperial County SELPA. My background is in the area of school psychology. I've also been, a district administrator in special education. Dr. Deborah Montoya is our SELPA Senior Director, and she's here today and will be presenting as well. She is also has background in school psychology, and we have Lupita Olguin Rubio, and her expertise is in all areas general education, focusing on English language development and literacy. And Vanessa Lopez, who can't be with us today, but again, she has a wealth of knowledge in the area of special education with her background in special education as a teacher for 18 years. She's also been an EL instructional coach, and currently she's also focusing in the areas of adaptive PE and assistive technology here at our SELPA. Again, we are a SELPA content lead in the area of supporting English learners with disability. We are one of 5 SELPA content leads, part of the California System of Support, and we are located in the southeast region of California in Imperial County. And just a quick review why we are here today. We are focusing on English learners with disabilities. Who are our English learners? Our English learners are students that have whose native or home language is any other language other than English, and they are currently in our public school system in the process of learning academic English. And our students with disabilities are students that have been formally identified as having a disability in one or more of the 13 disability categories as indicated by IDEA. And the disability is found to be so significant that it is adversely impacting their ability to make educational progress. In the state of California, our total students identified as having a disability are 28% of them are identified as being English learners. Again, our guiding our guiding resource and grounding resource is the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. This was comprised by number of experts across the state of California coming together in order to provide guidance to LEAs and best practices in serving students that are identified as English learners with a disability. Again, this is not a binding document, but it does serve as providing excellent guidance and best practices as we serve the unique needs of our English learners, but it does reference education code throughout the document. So today we are focusing on Chapter 5 of the Practitioner's Guide and all things of IEP development. Chapter 5 can be located in Section 3 of the Practitioner's Guide. And again, the Practitioner's Guide really focuses on having various entry points for practitioners. So if you're focusing on these different elements of the Practitioner's Guide, it really helps give guidance in the area that you may be focusing on. So again, we are focused on Chapter 5. So Section 3 comprises of Chapters 5, 6, and 7. And today, with our short time together, we are focusing on the development of IEPs for English learners. Okay, moving forward. As I shared, the components of Chapter 5 focus on the unique needs of IEPs that are developed for English learners, what is required in those IEPs, and identifying what linguistically appropriate goals or objectives are identified in the IEP, what is required, and what IEP team members need to be part of that IEP team for students acquiring English as a second language. Again, each chapter of the Practitioner's Guide focuses on questions to be covered within the chapter. Today, again, we are looking at the questions that are help support administrators in their in how they provide services to English learners in their at their sites. The quick questions that I'll cover for today are what is for administrators to consider, what is required in an IEP of an English learner, what role do families play in the development of the IEP, and how are decisions made regarding program placement. Okay, sorry everyone, I think my Zoom had froze real quick. So moving forward, as we come to this chapter through the lens of an administrator, this slide focuses on and has the linked resources to all the California laws and policies that help frame the decisions for educating our multilingual learners. And as today we focus on English learners and their development of IEPs. And the English Learner Roadmap is not coming out on this slide. I'm not sure. So again, when focusing on the development of the IEP for English learners, these are our guiding documents as we need to ensure that students are receiving goals in that are focused on our Common Core State standards in conjunction with the California English Language Development Standards, and also our California English Learner Roadmap, which had disappeared. But ultimately, as administrators, we want to focus on being assets oriented and needs responsive with the services that we are providing to our students. Okay, moving forward, in the quick review of IDEA and our federal law that comprises of the requirements and services that are required for the students that we serve with disabilities. These are really our 6 principles of IDEA. And throughout looking at these 6 principles, FAPE, are we ensuring FAPE, free and appropriate public education? Was the student provided a comprehensive linguistically and culturally and linguistically appropriate evaluation? the IEP component, student and parent participation, the consideration of the least restrictive environment, and the procedural safeguards that are provided to ensure that students and parents are receiving the legal requirements when a student is identified as having a disability, and really weaving all of these components together to continue to ensure that through each component, are we providing the student appropriate access? And are we providing the student educational benefit when considering these various aspects of under IDEA and IEP and special education services provided to each student? And as we discussed in our last meeting in chapter 4, in reviewing our CalPADS 2020 fall data, students who are English learners and they're they're mostly qualifying in this area of specific learning disability. And the second most commonly qualified area is in speech and language impairment and autism. So, really thinking about the fact that our English learners that they're qualifying, mostly 47.5% are qualifying under specific learning disability, which is something to think about as an administrator when looking at your own data at your sites, is if you are noticing a high number of referrals, and really taking note of what primary area are they qualifying under. Are you able to review with the team the psychoeducational evaluation that was conducted, and was the team able to tease out whether the student is presenting academic difficulties due to a learning difference, or presenting a true disability in their primary language and second language acquisition of English? And again, when you look at these three areas, it's really clear that these are three disability areas that have a language-based component to them. So again, always being able to ensure with our teams that we are ruling out the language difference or disability. And regarding all of the components that are required in an IEP, when we considered an IEP that is being developed for an English learner, these are the three key decisions that are the jurisdiction of the IEP team for students who are English learners with disabilities. So, regarding an IEP for a student that is English only, when we're looking at the development of an IEP for an English learner, these are three additional areas that the IEP team must consider and explicitly identify within the IEP team or within the IEP document: is the language of instruction, the use of accessibility tools, or the use of an alternate assessment for the ELPAC or CASP. That is an IEP team decision. And also, how and where will English language development designated instruction be provided within a gen ed setting, a special education setting, and who will provide that instruction? Will it be provided by a gen ed teacher, a sped teacher, or some type of EL coach? Those are things that must be identified in an IEP for an English learner. And again, as an administrator, it really falls upon the team to or as an administrator to ensure that just because a student does qualify for an IEP doesn't mean that those English learner services go away. That student is still required and entitled to continue to receive English language services and designated instruction. And moving forward, as part of the IEP development for English students that are English learners, is ensuring that we're providing active and meaningful participation for the parent. This is a legal requirement, and we need to ensure that procedural safeguards are provided to parent in their native language, so that they are understanding of their rights and their child's rights as a student with a disability. And also, if a parent is requesting documents to be translated, that we ensure that those documents are provided to parent in their native language to ultimately ensure and that the parent is providing informed and meaningful consent. Informed consent and participating within the IEP process in a meaningful way. And we need to support our IEP teams in the use of an interpreter. So if a special education teacher comes to you, requesting or trying to access the use of an interpreter, that we support our teams in that area of need. And figure 5.5 of the practitioner's guide is really helps guide the IEP team in determining what is important for the parent to know and understand to ensure that we're deriving parent engagement. So these are questions and information that should help support the team and to ensure that we're sharing with parents what their rights and roles are, what are the range of services that their child may have access to, that they understand their child's present levels of performance, their IEP goals that are being developed, and how to communicate with the parent during the IEP team, because it's so much information and parents may get overwhelmed within an IEP meeting in that short period of time. So this is a guiding tool to kind of help ensure that we're covering these bullet points and ensuring that parents are understanding the various aspects of the IEP being developed for their child. And here is, if you click on the link, it says figure 5.2 in the practitioner's guide. It is appendix 4.8, but it is a parent report. And it helps derive, the parent participation to add to the present levels of performance of the IEP document. So as an administrator during an IEP meeting, if you see that perhaps on the present levels page, the present levels of performance, where there's that section that, where it asks for parents' current concerns. If you see that it's blank or it says parents have no concerns, really that's kind of should be a bit of a red flag, as parents do have concerns, and maybe they aren't negative concerns, but this document kind of looks at helps a parent during a parent interview. What are your hopes and dreams for your child? What are your child's strengths and interests? And those are all areas that can be added to that parent component of the present levels, so that it's really that we're engaging in those meaningful conversations with parents and what their hopes are and what strengths they identify in their child to help form that IEP. Let's see. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Montoya as she begins to cover move forward into the IEP
Sure.
process and development.
Thank you, Christina. So, as we consider meaningful and active parent engagement and ensuring that we're getting towards a place of informed consent, we do know and agree that the IEP process can be rather cumbersome. And as administrators, in our lens, assisting and supporting not only our staff, but the parents and families, that together we're actively making decisions based on the true needs of the student. So, one of the main areas of the IEP that we call the PLOP, or the present levels of performance, will truly guide that conversation as an IEP team, because it is a team perspective. Some of you are joining as administrators, EL specialists, maybe coaches, literacy coaches, special educators, and we all have a place to support in the IEP process. Through this particular page, the present levels of performance, we're indicating all of the baseline skills that a student has. So, in as much as we know that the child with a disability may have relative weaknesses, deficits, if you will, this particular section is to truly discuss all of the relative strengths, all of the data that we have, whether functional performance, academic, pre academic, social skills, health, etc., given the various needs of that student who has been identified. So, through this series with us, we've talked about pre referral to referral, and now the child that is a multilingual learner who has been assessed with validity and reliability, and whom the IEP team feels is eligible for special education. So, as we develop that IEP, we truly are thinking whole child. And ultimately, how does that child's respective disability, their unique disability, wherever it falls in those 13 disability categories, what are the impacts of that disability and what are the true needs of the student? In consideration for all things of students whom are English learners, we understand that it's very difficult to disentangle, if you will, that need of that language difference versus disability, as it can become very much intertwined. But as a team, given all of the data, standardized data, assessment data, observation data, whatever all the data points that you have, we'd want to include all that information, including information from our EL specialist. What does participation in designated ELD look like? How is that student performing towards assessments that are part of your adopted ELD curriculum, in as much as your math curriculum, your ELA curriculum? All of these data points are important to discuss as we want to fully understand the impacts of the child's disability and how the student is performing today. Where do we build skill from? Where are we today? Next slide, please. So, as you're engaging with your IEP teams, it'll be important to also focus on what is this data point? Students' English language proficiency skills. As we're trying to assist students with gaining English language acquisition skills, and although being a multilingual learner in and of itself is not a reason for eligibility, it may be a secondary factor that affects the student in their growth and in their trajectory of their learning. But again, the layered approach as we look at what are the needs as it results from being a multilingual learner and how we can support that child given these respective domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Does the child's disability uniquely impact any one of these domains specifically? Is that an area of need that we see twofold appearing in this assessment and is also a disability related need? And that's something we'll want to focus on as we later continue to develop the IEP, and we'll go there in just a minute. So, at best, we want IEP teams to start here and look at this data to speak to and ensure that that ELD specialist, TOSA teacher, whomever it is that has the expertise and knowledge regarding what does designated ELD look like for the student, how is the student provided with access and equity to those ELD standards that take the focus during designated ELD, and again, how can we support to ensure that the student's disability is then not causing further uh, inequities or lack of access to that ELD curriculum and instruction. Next slide, please. Because what we do know is that English learners are a diverse group. Students whom are English learners, all multilingual learners, have various backgrounds, various needs, various levels of English language acquisition skills, have had different experiences, may have had formal education outside of the US, and they may have not. So, given all the differences amongst our English learners, this is where we have an opportunity to fully discuss our students who are multilingual learners with a disability, how their unique disability impacts learning, and how their English language acquisition skills have evolved, and how we can continue to provide support given the IEP, the individual child, as we discuss that child's needs. Next slide, please. So let's try a Q&A really quickly. And I'd like for you to drop it in the chat. Don't be shy. We're going to say this is a closed vault, if you will. But question that has been raised: must English language development goals be included in the IEP? Would you say yes? Would you say no? Or I'm not sure. It's always okay to say I'm not sure. So, do we need specific ELD goals in the IEP? Everyone's been shy in the chat. Oh, let's go to the next slide. I think friends are being shy. There we go. Thank you for your responses. All right, next slide. And the answer is no. So thank you those who shared. So let me review this a little bit because I know this has become a hot topic question across the state. It's not only you if you're thinking like, wait a second here. So, when we think about IDA and the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, yes, it requires that goals be developed in the areas related to the student's disability. So remember, the IEP is directly related to that student's disability. Why was the student eligible for special education? And what are the supports that are needed in relation to that disability area? As we know, being an English learner in and of itself is not a disability. Being an English learner does not qualify, if you will, or lead towards eligibility for special education under IDEA, nor under ADA 504. So we're pushing that one aside. We're going to focus on the disability first. And rather, the requirement that we are upheld to is ensuring that all IEP goals, as related to the disability, are linguistically appropriate. That's a lot to unpack. So we're going to go into linguistically appropriate goals in just a second. Next slide, please. So let's think about linguistically appropriate goals and objectives, where we have this alignment and combination of the California state standards, Common Core state standards at grade level. That one's another one to process. So remember, IEP goals are written at students' grade level. We take into consideration the student's ability and skills and needs, because we talked about baseline skills previously, and we take those baseline skills and we look for where is that baseline skill in comparison to that grade level of the child. What does the Common Core say? What's the expectation, the academic language? That then is also going to require us in respect to multilingual learners with a disability integration of also those ELD standards, the marrying, if you will, of the Common Core state standards in addition to acknowledgement of what is the student's linguistic skills, thinking back to ELPAC scores, participation in designated ELD, what does that look like? And how we then ensure that the access part is there for each of our students given their needs. Next slide, please. So there we have the English language development. So here again is the definition. Linguistically appropriate goals are not specific ELD goals, but rather aligned to the California ELD standards in support of the student's language acquisition and helping that child meet the academic goals that they need to do. But access is the big point there. Access and making progress in grade level curriculum. You'll see there on the far corner, we also have a snapshot of the newest iteration, if you will, related to the alternate LPAC. So if you serve students with moderate to severe disabilities, the ELD connectors are very supportive. They are scaffolded already to assist us with ensuring that our students with the most significant needs also have access to the ELD connectors and their relationship with the alternate LPAC to help us shape curriculum and instruction as well as assessment. Next slide. So, for some quick examples, and it's not exhaustive by any means, if you are now thinking and considering what do IEP goals look like from your chair as an administrator as you're participating in IEPs, and staff is reading out the goals that are designed related to the disability needs, and you're thinking again as a multilingual learner, how are we ensuring that access and ensuring linguistically appropriate goals? Because it is more than just checking the box to say, yes, it's linguistically appropriate, but what might that look like as, again, we bridge together these standards? So here are some quick examples. They are part of the California Practitioner's Guide, and they are also linked into the Padlet as well. Next slide. So, where do we start when we think about access and equity and accommodations and our supports for students with disabilities, both during everyday instruction and during assessment? The new California Assessment Accessibility Resource Matrix, this is the newest version. The newest iteration just came out maybe a few weeks ago. There are some additional accommodations in relation to the LPAC and the alternate. So, you definitely want the newest resource, and it is linked into the presentation slides as well as the Padlet. But that may help us during our IEP teams in formulating those conversations and truly considering what does accessibility look like given the individual student and that student's disability. Next slide. Because as we know that universal tools are available to all students and designated supports being available to all students, including students with an IEP or a Section 504. So our prior conversations have lived here in the use of universal tools and designated supports. Next slide. And for students with disabilities, and in discussing their IEP, we're considering accommodations. As we know, accommodations do not reduce the learning or performance expectations. And this sometimes may also be that myth within respective IEP teams, where there may be a potential prior belief that an accommodation would somehow hurt scores or lower grades or lower expectations, when actually they do not. Accommodations truly support our students in having that leveled playing field to be able to truly access and engage and participate fully, as well as have opportunities to truly demonstrate what they have learned and what they know when given the right accommodations for the right student. So we come back to again in relation to what are the needs of the student as we consider their needs as an English learner. So English language acquisition skills, assessments when we think about all of the accommodations that could be afforded during everyday instruction, including designated ELD, regular classroom instruction, and during performance on the LPAC. And then likewise, as we think about participation in the SBAC, as we consider again accommodations and what that looks like in the classroom across content areas, given the child's disability needs. So lots of things to consider as we discuss statewide assessments, because in the IEP process, it truly is more than statewide assessments. It's truly about the ensuring of these accommodations and supports throughout, for when they get to that place of assessment on statewide assessments, they know how to use those tools. So, as administrators, we also might be considering how can we further support our staff in truly knowing what those accommodations are, how to use them, how do we teach and train staff and students as well on how to use those accessibility tools so that we ensure again that they are truly viable and useful and supportive for that student. So, things to think about as you consider your role and how you may be able to further support your team members in providing access for our students who are multilingual learners with disabilities. Next slide, please. So here's some more tools, some accessibility resource graphics. We love a quick reference, at least I do. It grounds our team in having those discussions. It's always nice to have these graphics, even at your SST table, your conference table where you have your IEPs, because it helps us build that conversation and really look at what's available, what matches given the needs of the student, so we can further consider accessibility and ensure again that students truly have what they need to, again, both receptively and expressively be able to demonstrate skill and knowledge. Next slide, please. This particular tool is a great resource. I know we highlight it throughout our series with you, which is the ELPAC Administration Student Accessibility Checklist, because much different from the SBAC, the ELPAC Administration Accessibility Checklist is by domain. And uniquely for our students that have an IEP, that is a main responsibility of the IEP team, is to consider, again, universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. And the next layer to that is that active conversation that in few cases, and not all, but few cases, the IEP team may consider that a domain exemption is necessary for that child given that student's disability, that impact of that student's disability, it may uniquely be in one of those four domain areas. Whereas an IEP team, we would then ask ourselves, is the LPAC assessment truly assessing English language acquisition skills and proficiency, or are we actually assessing the disability? For which then again, we are not getting appropriate data because we're assessing a different need, a different skill, and perhaps again, that domain is not accessible to the student. We would hope that IEP teams first exhaust all of the universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations prior to the consideration for a domain exemption. Domain exemptions are allowable. They have been. For those of you who also wear your hat as an EL coordinator, and maybe you're thinking about the FPM process on the EL side, we were just looking at that yesterday, and my friends will correct me. I think it's 3.5. 3.5 of the FPM matrix, where it specifically asks teams to consider domain exemptions. So that might be another layer from your administrative lens in considering what does our EL master plan say in relation to domain exemptions, because a student could potentially earn or gain, if you will, demonstrate skill at a level 4, just given more accommodations and or perhaps a domain exemption so that the student can truly show what they know and not allowing that disability to really take over in an assessment. But again, that is an IEP team decision. And as much as it is an IEP team decision, whether the alternate LPAC or alternate assessments in general are appropriate for the student, please always remember that that first question of alternate assessments is the most important to have the discussion on, which is, does the student have a significant cognitive disability? Because children with a significant cognitive disability are eligible for alternate assessments. So I will share out that little disclaimer because it has come up frequently, is if the student has a primary disability of specific learning disability, as we know many multilingual learners fall into that category, a student with a specific learning disability is not eligible for alternate assessments. Next slide. Oops. And this is one of our newer infographics. Here we go. Alternate LPAC test types and the relation, and it provides lots of links to the CDE developed documents, which are excellent. It goes through who is eligible, who administers the alternate LPAC, and then how do we ensure, again, that the alternate LPAC test types are evident in our classrooms for students with extensive support needs, moderate to severe disabilities. So we hope that this tool and resource that we created here in our office is useful and supportive to you all in the field, as we do recognize that the alternate LPAC and the alignment to those alternate LPAC ELD connectors is new to all of us in the field. So this is one of our newest resources in the last year. Next slide. So, as we think of all factors, as we do have special factors in the IEP and considerations for our students who require assistive technology. So, furthering that conversation regarding accommodations. And it may be things from low tech tools to high tech tools. And of course, for our students with low incidence services and equipment that they need as a result of the need for from the disability, but they may need additional adjustments and support to support their needs as a multilingual learner. When we think about primary language resources, what might those look like? And for our staff who are monolinguals, we don't want to leave you out. It's not to say that every staff member needs to be bilingual, but what are those other resources that we can provide, whether it's translated glossaries, providing additional scaffolds, the background knowledge, the front loading, the key vocabulary in support of our English learners so that they have all the necessary tools given where they are in their English language acquisition? How can we help bridge the existing language and see that as an asset that our students bring to build additional knowledge upon? So, a big part of that, and is specific to IEP teams of multilingual learners who have a disability, is to discuss where that child will receive designated ELD. Next slide, please. Because as we know, assistive technology is wonderful. Technology, I should just say that first. Technology is wonderful. But how we use that technology to assist and support our students with disabilities is very important. The tool is one thing, but the accommodation to increase access and equity given that child's disability can truly open up doors for our students and assist them with truly having access to curriculum and instruction. Next slide. So resources, and application of resources, very, very important. Let's move on to the next slide. Because as we know, all English learners and English learners with disabilities must receive comprehensive ELD. It is a basic core service. As administrators, we're also thinking from the lens of LCAP Priority 1, course access, basic services, ensuring that our students are receiving core. So when students are eligible for special education, we want to ensure that they still receive core. So not in place of, but rather what special education supports and services are needed in addition to the receipt of comprehensive ELD. The IEP team specifically will then need to discuss what will that look like? Where will the child receive designated ELD? whether it's in a general education environment with supports and services and accommodations, perhaps, or truly in the special education setting. Again, that student may have more extensive needs. But that again is the IEP decision based on the individual child. Next slide. So here we just have again the basic definitions and consideration for integrated ELD, of course, across subject matter content areas and designated ELD, that protected time. As we consider the needs of multilingual learners with disabilities, whether their disability is mild, moderate, severe, extensive support needs, now again with the support of the ELD connectors, we're looking at the ELD standards and that protected time to focus on ELD standards, which may also require us to consider what is the unique mode of communication given that student's disability. Will that student need additional accommodations, supports, up into including perhaps also the child needing additional alternative augmentative communication devices, AAC, and additional support. So, things to think about as your team is discussing how we will continue to ensure that designated ELD is protected time and focused on the ELD standards. Next slide. So, our continuum of free and appropriate public education includes least restrictive environments. So, this is again where we encourage IEP teams, especially in this particular segment, as we consider the needs of multilingual learners with IEPs. Where will that child receive service? And we hope always in the least restrictive environment so that students are participating amongst their non disabled peers and having good language models, good supportive models, as we want to ensure students are making gains and growth. Next slide, please. But these are truly individualized discussions that you're having. And some considerations to think about, some research that might be helpful to you if this is again where you'd like to dig a little bit deeper as we think about linguistic demands and literacy. What does that look like? Designated ELD, and how are students grouped? As students may be grouped via proficiency levels or with other mixed groupings to provide greater supportive models. Maybe that's what you're considering in your dynamic. What does your EL master plan say about groupings? And as we think about this lane of least restrictive environment, how can we support and ensure that students who are dually identified English learners with a disability have the greatest access in that general ed environment and to the most maximum extent appropriate that we consider all these layers for our students given their multiple needs. Next slide, please. So we come to this space as all the overlaps. As administrators, you're thinking about the ELD standards, our Common Core state standards. If you're a special educator, you're also considering the state performance plan indicators as they respond to least restrictive environment, ensuring that students with disabilities have full access. The English language roadmap policy is a great place to bring us together and leverage our given expertise, whether you're a general educator, special educator, EL specialist, because we all come back to this framework of the LCAP conditions for learning, as all students are general education students first. Multilingual learners, special students with disabilities, all requiring the receipt of basic services, implementation of state standards, and ensuring course access. It is a basic civil right of our students who are English learners to receive comprehensive ELD. What we definitely want to highlight, if you will, as we think about the principles that live within the California English Learner Roadmap, is the first principle, our North Star, if you will, assets oriented and needs responsive schools. How do we respond to the students in our respective communities? And we absolutely recognize that across California, many of you are serving students with multiple languages, multiple dialects within languages, and how do we bring together those resources is a difficult question. And it may be that your staff also contracts with interpreters so that we ensure that parents have meaningful engagement and active participation during IEPs. Maybe you have staff who are fluent in various languages as well. So lots of things to consider as we look to then principal tool intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. We come back to again intellectual quality when we consider the needs of students with disabilities, also knowing that every child's an individual and what the need as it results from the disability may be very different. So again, that individualized space in that IEP is so important to truly take into consideration who is that child? How do we support that student and ensuring that their continued growth and progress towards Common Core state standards, towards English language acquisition skills, knowing that given that child's respective disability category, as students are very different, even within disability categories, how do we highlight their relative strengths, support their relative weaknesses, so that we see growth? And growth may look different for different students at a different rate, at a different pace, given that child's needs. Next slide, please. So with that, we do have a very quick IEP team checklist that's part of the practitioner's guide. It is linked into the Padlet as well as into these slides. It's not necessarily completely exhaustive, but it's definitely a resource and tool that can support and assist you as you may be thinking, are we meeting all of these metrics? You've probably been in many IEPs and maybe thinking about it through this new lens of again the dually identified need, English language acquisition skills, as well as given the student's disability. So you may decide to pull just a random sample of IEPs in your district, whether initials, triennials, annual IEPs, and quickly go through from again the dually identified perspective. Are we meeting all of these prongs in support of our students who are multilingual learners with disabilities? We hope this tool might assist you with just further disentangling where we are, where might there be gaps in practice. Oops, sorry. If we want to go back just a few slides, we'd love to hear from you because that takes us to about the end of our session. If you wouldn't mind, next slide, please, dropping into the chat box a new learning or a wondering. We never like to leave you with that hanging question that you hoped would be answered. So absolutely feel free to share with us a new learning or a wondering. We still have about 10 minutes. I went relatively quickly because I would like to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Once we stop the recording, I'm always nice to my friends. I don't want to put anybody on full view and we promise to edit. So if you have a new learning, we'd love for you to share that. And of course, if you have a wondering, we'd love for you to share that as well. Next slide. As you know, you can visit our website at any time, all of the resources that we share with you, as well as recording of past modules. We do have a full day module that's recorded and lives on our website for all things IEPs, and all of the information, FAQs that go along with this particular segment, as well as in a full day session on linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. In and of itself, a full day session if that's an area where you want to just gain more information or support your teams. You can replay, reuse any of the materials that we share with you for free. All of the sessions that we've recorded are for free. We just hope that you will share and pass forward the knowledge and support as we all work together to collectively assist our students who are English learners with disabilities. That particular email goes to all of my friends, Lupita, Christina, myself, and Vanessa. We're more than happy to answer any technical questions should you want to send us an email. And with that, I just want to say thank you on behalf of our team here at Imperial County SELPA. Again, this work is grant funded through CDE and CCEE, and we definitely appreciate your support.